this episode of the Lobby of Hobbies podcast, we sit down with Helena and Josh Capel, the dynamic duo behind not one, but two, yes, I said it, two board game publishing companies, Kids Table Board Gaming and Burnt Island Games, to hear from them the drive to starting these companies and what they look to offer the industry with their games. We also talk about the upcoming Kickstarter campaign for the highly anticipated game In Too Deep, set to launch September 15th. So enter as they share what they have to offer the hobby, and you just might discover a new game to add to your collection. Welcome to the Lobby of Hobbies podcast. I'm your host, Jazz, for today, and unfortunately my co-host, Judge, could not be with me. He's out busy doing his music thing. And today we have with us the masterminds behind Kids Table Board Gaming and Burnt Island Games. Would you guys love to introduce yourselves to our guests?
Sure. I am Helena Capel. I have been running these companies for about 6 years now, just over 6 years now. I've spent most of my time as an adult being a teacher. And in fact, I took a couple years off to run the board game companies. And this year I'm actually going back to teaching because I missed it so much. Still running the companies and teaching at the same time. We both companies are very different. One company is Kids Table Board Gaming, or KTBG, where we make games that adults can play and kids can play with them. They're more high interest games with adult mechanics, but also accessible enough for younger kids. And Burnt Island Games, where we make adult strategy games. So we're having a great time doing both of those things. And I'll let my partner and husband, Josh, introduce himself.
Awesome.
Well, sounds like you've already introduced me. So I will reintroduce myself. I'm Josh Capel. I am a game artist and graphic designer. I've worked for about 15 years in the game industry, maybe longer now. Also a game designer. I have a bunch of published titles. And now most of the art and graphic design I do is for our companies because Helena is an entrepreneur at heart and decided that she wanted to start publishing games. And now we do this stuff together. So I'm the art director and creative director for our companies, and she is the shot caller on pretty much all strategic aspects and big picture stuff.
Awesome. I think that's how it normally works, right? The woman is the shot caller. I know my wife is the shot caller at the house too.
That's our experience.
But I think that's awesome to hear, not only to have two people that are very enthused about the hobby, but two people that are a couple, husband and wife, that are into the hobby, that, like to pour their heart and soul into what they do. And I think that's awesome to have you guys have a vision, and, you have one who's the mastermind, one who I guess would be the creative heart and soul behind everything. But putting everything together on table to make things work. And I will honestly tell you that from what I've seen, from my experience with your games, it has been very successful.
Thank you. That's really nice.
Awesome.
I know a little bit about my experience with your games. I was actually introduced to Burnt Island Games first, and that's actually the games that I have in my collection. I had a buddy, JT, over at Gaming with Sidekicks, who I know from Dice Masters, the Dice Masters community. Mm-hmm. And JT was raving about Endeavor, mm-hmm. and I know he wrote a blog on it on the Gaming with Sidekicks page, and I read that thing thoroughly. And I know he was the first one in that Gaming with Sidekicks Discord to let everybody know that In the Hall of the Mountain King was being released. And just on his, I guess, his excitement and his knowledge of Endeavor, I pretty much backed In the Hall of the Mountain King when it hit Kickstarter, just on his sheer, I want to say, his sheer enjoyment of his experience with Endeavor. So I backed that, and at this past PAX, I was luckily enough to get a used copy from someone, I guess, who was on the BGG forums, who was going to be selling their copy of Endeavor. And I remember that I think the first night or the second night of PAX, it was like 10, 11 o'clock at night, and JT sat down with me to teach me Endeavor, and I definitely was not disappointed with my purchase, because it definitely was great. I think I went downstairs the next day, the morning, and I went to you guys' booth and was able to even get through and get the upgraded components for Endeavor. So I was kind of happy about that. But
right.
But let's get back to your, I guess, interest in even starting a board game company, because I know, Josh, just looking at your credentials with designing and doing art for games, even previous to your designing for KTBG and your work within Burnt Island. Helena, I see that, it says you were the mastermind. You were the one it says on your website, you were passionate about board gaming, and that you guys together collaboratively wanted to put together introduce your kids to the hobby. Now, what ages were your kids at this time?
Well, we had one very, very young child, and then we had one that was about 4 years old. And, of course, we got the typical Chutes and Ladders and Memory and, all of the ones for very, very young kids.
Monopoly Junior.
Oh, we had Monopoly Junior also. And I'm telling you, like, every time I played a game with him, which he was excited about, so I was fine with that also, I just, wanted to poke an eye out. It was just such a horrific experience for me, because I played games like Endeavor, and Endeavor was actually published earlier by another company, by Z-Man, before we reprinted it. But playing strategy games like Endeavor and Kalis and all those really crunchy games back in the day, it was so terrible for me to sit down and play these games with him. I was happy enough that he wanted to play games, and really at that time, trying to search for something that would make me a little bit happier was virtually impossible at the time. So this was, I'd say, about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Games for kids of that age, and even a little bit older, there's value to that sort of game, in that kids learn the basic structure of playing games. They learn how to take a turn. They learn how to act within the framework of a set of rules, and so on. Like very, very fundamental things about game playing, where there is value to that kind of stuff. And we talked about that, of course. But what we wanted was to have games that kids could play, but that the adults playing with them wouldn't be losing their minds out of boredom the entire time. So,
well,
the impetus.
Yeah. So, while I'm playing these games, and yes, I did know there was value, and that's why we were playing them. I didn't want to be bored anymore. So. Josh actually had a design called Shootry. It was a 2-player game, and it was an abstract battle game, and it was great. We played it all the time. Actually, we're happened to be at our cottage, which is where we played it mostly with our friends. It was a really great game, and I said, maybe you should just send it to Z-Man or some other publisher and see if they're interested in making it. And Josh was like, I'm not feeling it. I don't feel like somebody is going to want this abstract game. I said, okay, put a skin on it. Let's think of something that would work. And all of a sudden I came up with Food Fighters, and that was our first KTBG game. But it evolved a lot after we put the skin on it. It wasn't the same game anymore. And we did a lot of development at that time. And it turned out to be a game that younger kids could play and understand how to take their turn and what the basic mechanisms were in the game. without really spending too much time thinking about what they were doing. But the most amazing thing, and I saw this happening with our own child, and we shared it with other children as well, was kids were learning how to play strategically while they were learning to play the game. So you'd play one game or two games where they just would roll the dice. Essentially, you're trying to knock out the other player's food. They're just rolling the dice to try to get your food fighters out. But as the game progresses and as you play more games with kids, they start thinking about the placement of the fighters and whether or not they're going to roll for beans on their turn. Beans is the money in the game where you can buy certain things to help you on your turns to win the game. And it just, as we were doing this, I was realizing this is like a really amazing thing where you can be just a person who doesn't really know how to play games and go through the motions. And then all of a sudden you're learning how to play strategically. And so we decided we're not actually going to send this game out into the world. We needed to publish it because we made this game ourselves. Our son was play testing with us. We, play tested with our son's friends and family, and it felt like the right thing to do. So we went to Kickstarter and it funded and we made the game, and now we're like 7 years later and still doing it, and even producing different kinds of games that aren't for families and kids necessarily. So
now I think that's awesome because I know myself, one thing that, I'm definitely I guess you would say the hobbyist when it comes to the games in my household. My wife is the casual gamer. She's the one who will sit down and, will happily play a game, but it's always where it's to the point where I have to be careful in my selection of what I put. That way it's not too heavy, or that way it's
right.
For her, it's not to the point where it's like, oh, I just want to sit down and enjoy myself. But I really don't want to, be really crunching some numbers and crunching some strategies. So I think sometimes, especially now with her and her master's program, she likes to sit down and just enjoy casually. So we get a lot of things like cartographers to the table and just
right.
some quick light games. But my buddy Judge, who works this podcast with me, he has two daughters, one who is on her way to be, I think she just turned 3. The other one is 4. My daughter's only 1.5. I know one thing that I've always wanted to do is start building a collection for my daughter. And this is one thing that when I started looking into your games and I saw your different titles, I was like, oh, this would be good to add into my collection. That way, when she's old enough, she can start having games that were outside of the typical Monopoly. And you said Monopoly
right.
Junior and Chutes and Ladders and all these things. Again, that I know when I've sat down with my younger cousins or younger family members, you enjoy the time that you spend with them, but it's just you're playing games for them, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But sometimes when you sit down, you want it to be a full experience with the entire family, which I think the general conception, I think, is what you guys were trying to do with this, which I think is awesome. Now, I know my buddy went to PAX. It was his first convention with me this past year. His daughters at the time, he wanted to bring back a game. And the first place we went over to was the Haba Games table, which we brought back. I think he brought back a game for them for Christmas. And it was awesome because, the games have some layer of strategy that parents can kind of work in. And I think there's some tweaking in the rule sets that you can do to kind of help the kids along as they enjoy the game. And they loved it.
Right.
But he already is at that point where he's starting to look to take that next step and that next level, because he's seen it, especially with his 4-year-old, how the wheels are churning in her head when she sits down at the table to play, one of those games. And the thing that I had mentioned to him prior to doing this interview, I was like, have you checked out KTBG? Like, their games, I think, are on that next level that I think would hit not only her, but the entire family and as a whole. Now, were companies like Haba Games and other companies like that, were they kind of gave you like a Kickstarter and inspiration to what you guys were doing? Or did you guys just in your head say, oh, this hasn't really been hit on the market yet, what we're trying to do, we just want to just jump and dive in full-fledged? Or did you look and see what other companies are doing and say, hey, let's make some tweaks on how they're doing things?
I don't think we took any company in particular as a model. There are some companies that do produce games that are great for kids and also games that are great for families. But we wanted to hit a very specific niche with our games, which was we wanted our games to be a game that kids can play alone, or that an adult can play with kids, or that adults can play together without kids. So we've sort of created a very interesting space for ourselves and a design challenge for ourselves, where the games that we publish, in large part, have to satisfy those three criteria, where they're going to fit all of those, fit into all those envelopes neatly. So we think that we are one of the only companies that really focuses in on that. There may be others out there, but as far as I know, we're the only ones that have that very specific niche, and that was kind of the thesis of the company from the beginning, and how we modeled the choices that we made about which games we were going to produce and which ones we didn't. Now, to be fair, as our kids have grown older, our games have sort of grown a little as well. So the more recent games coming out of Kids Table are a bit more complex than the ones that we did earlier in the process. As you know, our kids are our primary playtesters of early designs, so they're capable of handling more now. You know, when kids are a bit older, they can handle more complicated math, they can handle reading at all, where at the beginning they couldn't read, so games had to be textless and so on. So to answer your question, I don't think we modeled after any company in particular, but we did take a look at games from other companies that were good examples of games that satisfied those criteria.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, and I think for our listeners to know, especially parents who do have children, that are looking to get a game that is, maybe that's outside of that, the Chutes and Ladders and those types of games, Sorry and Trouble, but to have, I think it's awesome for them to hear that you have a line of games, like you said, where the children can sit down and play with amongst themselves. The parents can play down with the kids, but also the parents can just have a game night to themselves and play something on the lighter side, but still feel like there's enough meat behind the game when they want something that's a little bit more strategic, even for new gamers, which I think is awesome. Now, is this something that you make sure that you place within your rule set, where there's almost a change or some tweaks to the rules, where there's different levels, like almost like a novice and more of like an advanced rule set that allows this to take place amongst your games?
We, for all of our games, not for all of them, but more and more, and recently, as a rule, we do include things that you can either take out from the game to make it more suitable for younger players or people who want a less complex experience, or things that you can add to the game in order to do the opposite. So we are experimenting with which is the better way, the better direction in which to do it. Should we present it in the simpler mode as the base of the game and say, add this for a more complex experience? Or do we present it in the more complex mode and say, remove this for the simpler experience? So we've been testing with different games to figure out which works better for our audience. But yeah, all of our games are adjustable for complexity's sake.
I think we're moving more toward the let's put it all in and give some rules for the things you can take out.
Yeah,
because the truth is, you're selling to adults, you're not selling to kids.
Correct.
The game. Yeah,
yes.
Right. And more and more we're seeing people just want to get as much value out of the things that they're buying as possible. So now you're seeing things like almost every game has a solo mode, where, I mean, a few years ago, solo games were solo games, but many games, or most games, did not have a solo mode.
Correct.
That is very desirable for people, especially, the state of the world right now. That's helpful as well. If you can make your game also a 2-player game, that's also a really big thing right now. But to be able to also offer a game to a whole family, and then also, the kids go to sleep and the parents are ready to play the game in a different way is a pretty huge thing. So buying a KTBG game now, you're getting, for the most part, a solo game, a family game, a 2-player game, and a game that adults can play, a game that kids can play, and then a game that adults and kids can play together. So that's amazing value. And comparatively speaking, our games, they're not inexpensive because the component quality is very high, but compared to many games that adults would play on their own where they're not playing with children, they're still less expensive than those games. So you're really getting a good value by buying a KTBG game.
Oh, I would definitely second that. I know, while I don't have any in my collection, I do know quite a bit of my friends within the hobby that rave not only about the gameplay, but also the component quality. I know when they got their copy of Rec Raiders, that was one thing that they raved about. I was on all the Discord channels I was on, just the component quality. And when Fossilis hit Kickstarter, I think people were raving about it. And it was funny, you wondered if they were talking about being able to play it with their kids, but they were the first thing saying, "Oh no, I'm excited just to play this have these games for myself," which is awesome. Now, talking about people who are hobbyists, I know most of our friends, especially our personal friends within our family they're casual gamers, definitely new to the hobby, stuff that's lighthearted, and we're introducing them to the hobby. But for each of you guys, what were some of the games that really started getting you guys into the hobby? Was it your your Catan, or was it anything else that really started to immerse you into the hobby?
I mean, we are we're the classic Catan entrance into the hobby story. Like we didn't really have any hobby game experience prior to that game, and when it hit our family, it hit it hard.
So hard.
We played probably 300 games of Settlers of Catan in a year. Like really.
Oh wow.
Yeah, us and my brother and sister and their respective spouses.
It got to the point where the cards in the game were basically disintegrating, and I don't know if you have any games that have very old cards in them, or even an old set of cards, but they smelled so bad. By the time we finally got a new copy of it, it just was played so much.
They were almost liquid, like they weren't paper anymore. So Settlers of Catan was the one that dragged us in, and then I was at the same time that we were getting into the hobby as hobbyists and players, I was getting into the hobby as a designer and an artist working for other companies. So I think I was the one that sort of sought out other games and brought them to the group as well. So then from there we spread into the other sort of evergreen classics, your Carcassonne, Ticket to Ride, Tikal, Puerto Rico. Kalis eventually became a huge hit in our group.
Still a huge hit.
We still play it. Stone Age, and then ultimately the one that really made a huge splash was the original edition of Endeavor in our game group. That game still has not left our the stack of games that comes to game night, or if game nights still existed. But
I think
Endeavor
we're all
was
itching
in the
for
pile
that game.
years.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. But Endeavor was in the pile for years and years and years, and to this day still has a place in the pile. And that is why, even though we had this company, Kids Table, that produced children's games, when the opportunity came up for Endeavor to come our way, Helena pursued it.
It wasn't
the Terminator.
It wasn't actually an opportunity. I wanted it, and I worked really hard to make that happen. It wasn't just like it fell in our laps.
Yeah, but
although Josh did the art for the original game, so we had a little bit of an in.
Yeah, already like a pre-existing relationship with the designers was a nice sort of.
It doesn't hurt, right?
Start. It didn't hurt at all, and that's what sort of inspired us to start Burnt Island Games, because Endeavor is not a game that at all would fit into the KTBG thesis. So in order to produce this game, we decided, well, let's also form this adult strategy game company so that we can do Endeavor. And then from there, the rest is kind of history. And now we have these two streams of games that we produce as a family.
I think that's awesome. I think there's always that one game. I think you said like I didn't start in Catan. I started surprisingly, Josh, with Pandemic. That was my
Oh,
that was my jump into the hobby. I was playing just party games. I was enjoying the idea of having family and friends together, just to get together and have games. And I was like, oh, let's see what else is out there. And it was the year that Pandemic had just released, or the year after Pandemic released, and it was there as the top, the hottest game out there on Board Game Geek. I just Googled and I wound up coming across Board Game Geek, and that game was one. Sorry, my dogs, I think, must hear another dog out there, but that was definitely one of the games that really immersed not only myself but my wife into the hobby. And surprisingly, her being very casual, that game she really clung on to, and she still clings on to it today. Like that would say that's hands down her favorite game. But
wow.
she loves cooperatives.
Right.
Cooperative games are something that she enjoys because it's something that we can, as a family, sit down together and work together to be able to have that enjoyment.
Absolutely.
Have you done Pandemic Legacy?
We have done Legacy. We've done Legacy 2, and we are excited for the next Legacy Season 0 to be coming out. So we enjoy it.
Some interesting trivia for you. The original Pandemic graphic design
he knows this.
was done by none other than Josh.
And I will tell you, when the second edition came out, I did not. Everybody's like, "Oh, I want the new art." No, I fell in love with the art from the first one, and it stayed in my collection very long until we wound up gifting it to a friend. And they felt that this definitely is one of the games that we would introduce a friend to and say, "Hey, this is what hobby gaming is. This is something that it's not your typical Monopolies." And I think everybody who we sat down to play or introduce to the hobby, Pandemic definitely is the one. I know most people would say it's Ticket to Ride or it's Catan, but definitely this is our first one because it allows us to help walk them through playing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that game made waves and is still making waves for a reason. Like, it's the first cooperative game that felt right.
Yes.
So I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Let's see. On to my other questions. So now you guys had mentioned Burnt Island. You actually answered my question, which I had, which was your drive and your your want to start Burnt Island. But with Burnt Island, I will say that it's probably, you guys have two very hot titles out there with Endeavor, Age of Sail, and In the Hall of the Mountain King. But you guys have a third one set to recently release with Kickstarter. Let's let everybody know about what that game is, and I know how itching I am to get it to my table.
Awesome.
All right. Well, our next title is called In Too Deep, and it is a game that was designed by myself and Daryl Chow, who is a friend of mine who now lives, a friend of ours, I guess, who now lives in Singapore, but lived in Ottawa for a while. So we live in Toronto in Canada, and so we were able to sort of meet through the game designers community here in Canada. And he's since moved away, but we designed this game, and eventually, after enough begging and pleading, Helena agreed to publish it through Burnt Island Games. So, In Too Deep, it's sort of set in sort of a near future, apocalyptic type of future where civilization has crumbled down into remnants of a few existing city-states struggling to maintain order. And there is an evil organization called the Syndicate that tries to infiltrate and take over these cities. The way they do that is they infiltrate the criminal element, the existing criminal element in those cities. They upgrade the criminals with enhanced cybernetics so that they can be more effective, and then they use those criminals to take over the structures in the cities. Now, we, as the players, we work for a secret organization that's devoted to stopping the Syndicate. And the way we do that is that our scientists have discovered that we can actually hack into those upgraded cybernetics of the criminals, and via those cybernetics, we can sort of track and observe, and even as we get better at it, start to control a little bit what those criminals do. So we can influence their activities around the city, and by doing so, we can gather evidence, gather intel on how the Syndicate operates, and try to foil their plot to take over the city. The cool twist in this game is as you are manipulating the criminals to do stuff around the city, you need to make them commit crimes on behalf of the syndicate so that you can get the evidence on how the syndicate operates. And that is going to affect your own morality. So over the course of the game, you do have to make decisions about how good or how bad you're willing to be in the course of your mission. And the player who ends up doing the most bad and becoming the most corrupt over the course of the game will have gone in too deep and will suffer a scoring penalty at the end of the game. It's a really fun sort of behavioral balancing mechanism that overshadows the challenge of the game as you play.
Yeah, I think this is one that the theme was something that really attracted me when I heard this game announced. And I know when Gen Con Online this year, 2020, had announced that you guys would be having this game being demoed. This is one that I made sure that I had set my day aside so I can get as much demoing of this game in, and I loved it. It is absolutely incredible.
So you are the jazz that I taught.
I am the jazz that you had you were running in that room. Yes.
And hello, the jazz that I taught. How are you?
Yes, it is. It was definitely, it's an awesome game. The way the mechanics work, it's wonderful. This is again one that some of my guys my friends within the hobby, especially my friends over at Gaming with Sidekicks, had talked about when this game was announced, right. And we fell in love with it.
That's amazing.
If I'm correct, September 15th is the Kickstart date.
Yes.
And trust me, it is on my calendar, ready to back as soon as that hits. But for those people that are listening that are not hobbyists, if I was to describe this game, it may still be off, but to give you kind of an idea of what this game would give you a feel of, think Minority Report meets The Matrix. That's exactly how I thought of this game.
Wow.
And if you are a big fan of The Matrix or a big fan of Minority Report, I think this is a game that would be right up your alley theme-wise. And that's just how I describe this game to everyone. And the moment I use either of those movie titles, people who are not into the hobby, and when I've told about this game, they said, when this game comes to your house, let me know, because I definitely want to try this game out.
Fantastic. That's so awesome.
That's good data for us. We'll use that.
I've actually used that already.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
She just typed it out and posted it right now.
Now speaking with respect to Gen Con being online, I know, COVID has actually, affected not only just companies in general, but it has really affected the hobby as a whole. I know it hit right before, the big con season started. And my question to you guys is, how has COVID affected you guys as a company, whether it be with releases or anything like that, whether it be the convention season? Have you guys had to take a huge turn left, turn right on how you approach things for the rest of this year?
Everything's sort of upside down. We were like, when this started, it was just in the crux of our development of In Too Deep, and our development team, we were meeting almost every single day to like pound this out and make this happen, because we wanted to run the campaign in March, and we were so close. And then the pandemic hit, and we couldn't see each other or do anything, and we were just paralyzed really for a month there. We really didn't know how we were going to make this happen, and so eventually we ended up getting it a sandbox version of it on Tabletop Simulator, and able to do some development with Daryl, who was in Singapore, or is still in Singapore, and Sean, who works with us, and Josh and I. And it's sort of, I think it might have actually changed the way we're going to be doing things from now on. Like, it's so much easier to reach people around the world, on a very different level than we were doing before. So now we can have all these people play testing games for us without having to really send anything out to them. So on that note, it's been positive for us. So we've had to learn to adapt, and we have, and that's been really great.
I will say, though, that it has created an entirely new, challenging, demanding responsibility and task for us to mandatorily engage in when we're creating a game. So not only do we have to create a game that works in real life and is play testable in person, we then also have to manage, create, and manipulate the digital version of it. And there are differences in sort of execution between the two that you have to be aware of. Like if something is playtesting perfectly on Tabletop Simulator and is working and is smooth, it doesn't mean it's going to work great on the table when you're in person.
Yeah.
And vice versa. There are things about In Too Deep, like just even the very simple thing of cards in your hand in Too Deep, for example. It's a game where you need to satisfy criteria on the cards in your hand by manipulating stuff on the game board. Well, in real life, you can kind of look at both of those things at the same time. You know, you can look at the card in your hand and sort of glance over and look at the board and sort of shift your vision between one and the other. But I will just summarize by saying that COVID has impacted the creative side of things in both positive and negative ways. We've had to adapt for it, which is going to prove to be a benefit in the long run because we're now able to do all this digital stuff, but it's extra challenging and extra effort that we need to expend on being able to do it in these times via digital stuff. But business-wise, COVID hit us in some ways that Helena can probably explain better than
in a really weird way. So I found that the first 2 weeks after everything was sort of starting to lock down was wild.
Bonkers.
We had 2 weeks of like
record-setting sales.
Email after email after email after email of sales, and which is fantastic. Our web store. Yes, yeah. Our web store, which is fantastic because typically we sell through retail. All the stores were closed. Nobody had anywhere to go. They, some of our games were sold online at some of the online retailers, but not everywhere. So our web sales were just unbelievable. And then I guess everybody got their fill, 2 weeks, and it stopped. Just like full stop. And then the sales have trickled in throughout. But what's interesting is that
August was good, actually.
August was very good, and the reason why is because things were starting to move from hobby stores to online retailers, or hobby stores becoming online retailers.
Yeah. Everyone's adapting
and starting to sell our stuff. So, March was great, and then April was not so wonderful, and May and June not so great, and then all of a sudden in July we started seeing an uptick, and August was just fantastic. So we're all adapting. We're figuring out how to navigate our own spaces and our sales and through these times, which are difficult, and obviously people are not seeing an end to it anytime soon. So we're going to have to move on with our lives and going to have to move on with our businesses and schools and all those things.
I wonder what people's behaviors are going to be like. Like what kind of games are people buying if they think they're going to not have anyone to play with?
I'll tell you what games they're playing.
Roll and Rights?
Yeah, because they can do that. They can do that through Zoom
games that have
whatever.
Solo modes or
exactly.
Like 2 people? Yeah.
Yes, and they're buying family games, and they're buying family games that they can also play. Just like we make.
Yeah, what company?
They can, exactly.
Why
They're
not,
buying
right?
games that they can get the most out of. So they'll buy a game that has a solo mode that can play 2 players, they can play with their families, and they can play with their significant other or whoever they're bubbled with. But I do think it has overall that has contributed to our success over the last couple of months, because we're sort of all in this for the long haul, and many cities are shut down. You're from New Jersey, I think.
Yes.
Am I right? Yeah. So I know that things have been very difficult there. I have family there actually, and talk to them every week, and hearing the stories of what's going on in their county. And I mean, we're in this for a long time, and what better to do than play games with your family?
Oh yeah, I would definitely most certainly agree with that. I know just amongst friends and family that um, I know I had a few that came to me and said, "Hey, Jazz, I know you're really big into the hobby. Kind of hobby of board gaming, and my kids are getting bored with what they have. I'm getting bored with what to do, and all the different activities I can. I feel like I need to, find one of these hobby stores to open up so I can start buying, more crafts and things like that. I think I've run out of all my whole craft backup storage.
All the yarn
But
is gone.
yes, so it's like there's nothing else to do with the kids as a family. Like, what would you recommend? So of course, I recommend the things that that I currently have or that had in my collection, or I had family that I would loan games to, or things like that. But to know that with the KTBG lineup, that you guys have a great array of games that are wonderful for not only families, but again, even if a couple doesn't have children, it's definitely something that a new couple can sit down at the table and really enjoy themselves. And for those that
Absolutely.
are looking for something that's definitely a little bit meatier, they're willing to take that next step. I even think like the Burnt Island games are not so heavy, because I wouldn't. They're in that middle weight
Right.
range,
Yep.
but they
Absolutely.
are very accessible to
Mhm.
people who are new to the hobby. And I know when I think of people who are into things like Tetris, or into those bubble burst games on their iPhone and things like that, that in the Hall of the Mountain King is something that has those polyominoes that they can put together and kind of use a little. You kind of, they're thinking the Tetrisy strategy of how to build
Right.
things out, but they
Right.
can they can still enjoy it, which I think is great, to have games that, while people are figuring out their strategy on a heavier game, they don't realize how heavy the game actually is. And it's a
Right.
very good entry level, which I think is awesome, especially for our listeners who are probably definitely on the more of the entry level casual style gamers who
Right.
are looking to get more immersed into the hobby.
That's
Well,
Endeavor's strength. For
yeah. Well, I mean, one thing we're looking to do, we sort of are in this corner with KTBG where, we can say kids can play it and then adults can play it, and so on. We tried to sort of have that kind of thing with Burnt Island, and how do we describe our games? Well, essentially, they're easy to teach, easy to learn, but have a lot of depth. They are mid-weight. You're not going to spend more than an hour and a half on the game, which is good, because I cannot sit down for more than an hour and a half to play a game. But also, the rules aren't so difficult that it's not difficult to get right into the game.
Yeah,
And
what
we
you're
did.
doing is never complicated. Like
Right.
the little
Right.
bits of what you're doing is never complicated in any of our games. It's just they all blend together to form a rich experience.
And what's nice about Endeavor, for example, is essentially the first turn that you take, the first round, is you're teaching the rules as you're playing the game. And that, to me, I think is huge when you're playing with newer gamers, or people who are just starting to get into the hobby.
Yeah, Endeavor's
Yes.
got the best pace, I think, of any game I've ever played. I love how it accelerates over the course of the game to the point where the first turn, the first round is over in a heartbeat, and everyone just kind of looks up, is like, "Oh, that's it." And then
Yeah.
if you're the person who's teaching the game, you're like, "Don't worry,
Yes.
don't worry, you'll get it. You'll see." And then like the next turn's a bit longer and more complicated. The next turn's a bit richer and more deep. And then by the time you get to like the sixth and seventh turns of the game, which are the two final turns, those two turns are like half of the length of the game. So it's the ramp up is so like steep and sudden. It's amazing. The pace of the game is wonderful. Love it.
That is, I think that's the perfect way to describe it. When I first played it, I was like, oh, that's it. Okay. And I think JT said, just wait, you'll see. So
Yeah.
I sat there and I saw the game starting to ramp up. I saw everything's starting to come together. My strategy starting to, unfold. And even when you get to those last couple turns, it's like at your very last turn, you're like, man, that's it. I wish there was another turn left. And you're and a game that gives you that feeling of, man, I wish I had another turn. It gets you wanting to sit down and play that game right again. So
that's a design goal. Is you always want people saying one more turn, not one turn too many.
No, one turn too. Yes, exactly. But sometimes I play and I think I'm so thankful that there isn't another round, because I know if there was, I would be finished.
Now, with the hobby, for people that are out there listening, I know the past 5 to 7 years, maybe a little bit longer, we've seen the tabletop hobby start to have this huge influx of, in some cases new gamers, but also even some gamers who are returning back to the hobby, where they may have started off with a Catan and they fell off for a bit, but now they're seeing the hobby grow back up again. What do you guys believe is that could be attributed to? With the growth of the hobby recently in the past few years, what do you think that could be attributed to? Because we're not only seeing it with just specific publishers. Do you think it's maybe the vast array of games that are out there? Do you think it's the conventions that people were having the ability to go to? What do you think the huge influx of new gamers and people coming into the hobby could potentially be?
I have thought about this, and I think that the answer that I've come to is that I think it's just the general legitimization of game playing as a thing that adults can do. So our generation, and we're in our early 40s, and I think our generation of grown-ups grew up playing video games, playing board games, playing games in a way that our parents never did, and generations older than us never did. So their generations played with games and toys as kids and then let them go and became adults and never dabbled back into that. Our generation held on to that longer than theirs did, and it became okay for grown-ups to be interested in these things and have these things as hobbies as their lives continued. So I think that it's just a general acceptance of these sorts of entertainment types for adults. That is what is contributing to that, and that includes not only board games and video games, but also even the themes that we see in movies, successful movies and television shows and other forms of entertainment. It's a lot more comic book style stuff, fantasy stuff, sci-fi stuff than there used to be, and it's all of a piece.
I mean, I guess on that idea of theme, like, when I think about when I was young, and so kids were playing games, but the adults I knew that were playing games were playing like war games. And that's what I thought adult games were.
Really?
Yeah, I think like Risk. Like the adults I knew that played games, that's what they played.
Oh, for me it was Trivial Pursuit or nothing.
And that also, and Trivial Pursuit. But I think, like you
smoking
said,
cigarettes and eating, sharing fondue.
Over Trivial Pursuit. But I think that there are so many more games that are exciting for adults to play now, that it's not just Monopoly. It's not just Risk. There are so many games and so many themes and something to fit everybody's interests.
And I think that's something great. Like you said, it's definitely something that can hit everyone. There's something out there for everyone, whatever you are into theme wise, right? I believe, there is a game that fits your niche, which I think, you hit it right on the nail, the nail right on the coffin. That's how I looked at it. I mean, I have friends that come to they look at my collection like, wow, you have so many games. And they said, why do you have so many games? I personally like them all. While I don't always get them all to the table, I personally, for me, and I tell my wife this, the reason the games are in my collections, because if I do have friends that do come over, there is something I believe on that shelf that, if they're interested in wanting to try a game, I know I can ask them, hey, what are you into? What do you like to do? And I can pull something off the shelf. And at the end of the night, hopefully, they leave enjoying the experience and enjoying and saying, hey, while I may not, purchase a game myself, I know you have them, but I didn't know the hobby was this. I thought it was, nerdy, or I thought it was, more boring. Oh, it's nerdy. Yes. Right. But I thought it was boring, or I thought it was just like your Monopoly, or, people who sat down and they played bridge, cards, for,
Right.
hours on end. But, I think that's good to hear you guys have that, take that insight on different insights, as well as where the hobby has come from, where it's going. And I honestly only think that it's going to be continuing to grow, especially now with online gaming. You have people who are the video gamers, right, who are now interested in, I know video gamers who are now seeing many of these board games start translating over into apps or things like that are on Steam, even if they don't have Tabletopia or Tabletop Simulator. They're seeing things on Steam.
Blurring the lines.
Yeah, so I think it hits those different niches, and people are finding games, I think, that are, even if they're into the more abstract or puzzly type things, they're finding, instead of the Candy Crush, it's now they can play Potion Explosion, or these types of things that's introducing
Slay the Spire or whatever.
Yeah, that's introducing them, subtly to the hobby, and when they find out that's a board game, now they can actually, own a physical copy of it, which I think I think is great. But guys, I think that's all my questions for today, and I definitely want to thank you guys for coming out to the show today. And I did want to leave you guys with a little a plug. If there's anything you guys want to talk about, I know you have that big Kickstarter coming out from Burnt Island, and you do have one that's going to be fulfilling. If you want to talk about Fossilis and when that might be hitting retail for our listeners out there, this is your time.
Thank you. All right, so let's go in order here. So September 15th, Into Deep on Kickstarter. We have really a lot of amazing surprises coming up for that Kickstarter campaign. We tend to run really fun campaigns and try to get our backers as involved as possible. And every time we get people thanking us for the involvement of the backers in making the campaigns, and also getting them to help us make decisions about certain things. So that is September 15th, Into Deep. Coming up after that, Fossilis will be, it was a Kickstarter campaign. It will be fulfilling.
Oh my God, so excited.
So excited. In October, mid to late October, and it's heading at the end of October to retail, so look out for that. And finally, in November, mid-November, we're going to have another KTBG Kickstarter campaign for an amazingly beautiful, so much fun game called Creature Comforts. It is a cozy game where you're competing for points, but you never really feel while you're playing the game like there's any competition between you and the people you're playing with.
It's so weird. It's this game, you just enjoy playing it to the point that you don't care about beating the other players. Like at the end you're like, I won, hooray, but you don't, like, that isn't the most satisfying thing about playing the game. It's so strange but so wonderful when you're playing it. I love it.
It's a really great game. So that is the middle of November. And then going into the new year, we've got a couple of other Kickstarter campaigns coming up as well. But no information about that stuff has been released yet, so I can't really say anything.
Secrets.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And hey, that's some of the best things, right? Having the secrets and having the anticipation of what's next, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But that's so awesome. And yes, for our listeners out there, if you have not yet played a KTBG title, I haven't myself, I would definitely be looking to add some to my collection. But as well, if you haven't played any of those titles, check them out. Also, as well as the Burnt Island games, check those titles out. I will be posting links in the description for this podcast on those. That way you can head over to their pages, find the links to their store, and purchase a game for your family. I think it's something that you will definitely not regret. Definitely enjoy it. And hey, if it's definitely a hobby you have not yet gotten into, the idea here at the Lobby of Hobbies is to enter, share, and discover new hobbies, right? So again, we welcome you. Again, we want to give a thanks to Helena and Josh for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.